Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to today's Reddit Quickie from the subreddit HFY, called Clipboard, written by Legal. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope you enjoy. Scisroy could feel his heart fluttering in his chest as he looked up at the building in sight before him. It was simply massive. He had no idea how many people were working on the structure, but it had to be a lot. He could see movement all around the base, small figures like Rosette and Neuron to the massive beasts of the Rune and the Chloris. How was he supposed to figure out who to talk to? He looked over at his father, who nodded and motioned towards the scene before him. Just like we talked about, find the boss, tell him your skills, and you'll have a job by the end of the day. Simple as that. But how? How do I find the boss? Scisroy gulped nervously as he looked at the sheer scale of the work going on before him. That's the easy part. Find the human. If there is more than one, then just be the loudest one with a clipboard. What's a clipboard? He asked. His father traced out a rectangle in the air with his small, fine work hands. It's a bit of wood about this big. It clipped things onto it. I am not sure why they use those instead of databases, but trust me, you'll find a human with a clipboard and he's going to be in charge. Oh, no, who is? Scisroy considered this for a moment and then gave his father another nervous glance. You'll do fine. Humans value our labor greatly, and our family name is well known. But why can't I come to work with you? Or why can't you talk to them for me? Rizmat chuckled at that and reached out to give his son a reassuring pat on the back with his larger upper right hand. Because you are not a master yet, and because you need the experience of doing this on your own. And before you ask, humans don't just want master masons. They'll use any skill so long as you work hard. Now go. With that shove, Scisroy was sent tumbling forwards. He kept walking then, crossing the street before entering the dirt and gravel lot surrounding the base of the structure being assembled. All around him were workers that were walking or even jogging with a speed and purpose, some calling out to one another, some hauling supplies or tools, but everyone seemed to be doing something. He tried to look around for clipboards that his father had mentioned, but he had to quickly scurry out of the way of several of the other workers who seemed to move only in straight lines from point to point and not let anything deter their path. He wandered around for a few minutes and then finally saw him. He'd seen humans before. His father knew a few. They never seemed to be very impressive compared with the other FTL-capable species. They possessed only 2 grabber hands, and they lacked the protective shells or exoskeletons. Their raw strength was average at best, and often subpar. Not to mention their sensory organs were very limited, even if they possessed a wider average range than most species. But they're clearly made to work somehow. The human was wearing a bright yellow helm, and some kind of wearing a bright green vest over more simply subdued clothes. He recognized the heavy brown boots right away. Steel-toed, they were called. The figure was standing on the ferrocrete square with a hole in the center of it. He was leaning over, looking down, and lifting his hands at the clipboard to his face. Is it crap? Scisroy froze for a moment as he heard the figure curse. Was the human upset? Is it crap? A figure of speech. He couldn't hear the reply, but the human nodded and straightened up. Good. The human began to walk, and then Scisroy gathered his nerves. Feeling his heart fluttered, still he quickly jogged over to try and catch up with the moving human. Hello, human, my name is... I don't have any work for you, kid, the human said, without even looking up over at him. Scisroy's stomach seemed to drop into the pit of his torso, and the flat rejection, and he stopped, his eyes downcast. Oh. But when he stopped, like the human soon stopped as well, a few steps further, and he looked back at him. What? Is that it? Come on, kid. Haven't you done this before? The human snorted, usually a sign of agitation or anger, but for some reason Scisroy thought that he was amused. What? No, sir. As soon as he said that, the human shook his head. Should have known. All right. The human lifted up his wrist to check the chronometer, that he wrote something before waving Scisroy on to follow him. Look, kid, let me guess that you're some stonemason, based on your tools and the fact that you're a frisnem. But I'm not at the finish work yet, not even close. What use is a stonemason when I don't even have any frescoes yet, huh? Shizroy nodded, and his rejection was now explained. Okay, thank you. He started to turn away and leave, but the human quickly called out to him. Kid, stop! The human walked back to him, turning him around by his shoulders. Shizroy gulped a little, looking up at the slightly taller figure before him. He knew humans had a variety of forms, but this one was fairly bulky, thick forearms with a light hairy coating and a protruding fat sack on his torso. Though Shizroy had certainly seen much larger fat sacks. It just wasn't common for any Frisnum but noble class. You're supposed to then tell me that you need a job no matter what, that you'll learn, and that you won't take no for an answer. Shizroy blinked at him. I am? Yes. Go on. Tell me that. The human let go of his upper shoulders, and then Shizroy hesitated before replying. I need a job no matter what, that I'll learn, and you won't. I won't take no for an answer. He leaned back as the human's face suddenly got red, and he bellowed out, Frick is this? Some little jerk coming off the streets telling me what to do. The set of balls on you. The frick do you get off? Get the frick out of here before I kick your ass. Shizroy gulped and prepared to run for it, but then the human's face seemed to return to normal, and he reached out to grab the kid's shoulder. Kid, don't run. It's part of how this works. Jesus, you had that kick puppy dog look. It's not really mad at you, kid. It's a ritual thing in construction. But you cursed. When Shizroy mentioned that, the human laughed and shook his head. Boy, you really are new to this. This is construction, kid. You're going to have to get used to the swearing. You'll be hearing it a lot. Especially human swears. I've noticed how quick you Xenos pick up our curse words. Anyway, what you're supposed to do is yell back at me and we go back and forth a bit. Then, if I like you, I give you a job, and if not, I'll tell you another job site to go check out before the job where you do it all over again. But here, I'll go easy on you and I can see that you're nervous. Just come on. The human turned and waved him once more. Now Shizroy was more confused than anything else, but there might apparently be a prospect of a job, so he followed along. The human stopped, and then before the section of the building where some large clawers were hanging with the gliders, trying to push some glass pieces into a setting, but they weren't fitting. Hey! The human called up, cupping his hand around his mouth and using his clipboard to try and project his voice. Hey! He tried again, and then picked up a small rock from the ground and handed it to Shizroy. Here, hit that one in the back. Shizroy looked at the rock, then the human, who had nodded at him and pulled the upper arm back, before letting the rock shoot forward, tossing it, at the rock several floors up and hitting the chorus in the back. The beast looked back and down then, which was when the human shouted back once more, The other way! And he made a rotating gesture with a raised finger. The workers gripped the massive slabs of glass in their multiple furred arms and turned them around, at which point they slid into place easily. Shizroy could see them wave back, but the human was already walking away, so he had to jog to catch up. All right, kid. What's your name? Shizroy. All right, Roy. I think I've got the job for you, besides tossing rocks at my more oblivious workers. Just up here, he trailed off, at that, as they saw the gilded Land Roller drive onto the worksite. Ah, frick, management. Gotta deal with this first. Without any other input or an idea of what to do, Shizroy followed after the human, who stood near the vehicle and waited. Shizroy stood to his side and also waited. After a few seconds, the chauffeur, a well-dressed, six-eyed Cassiatan, got out and walked along the vehicle and opened the back doors. With the feathered Krasanokwa stepping out, and was already talking and waving. So, as you can see, the project is coming along very nicely. We're currently ahead of schedule in several sectors and should be ready for the shareholder meeting next week instead of next month. Shizroy stepped back, and then, as the Scarabian pulled a considerable bulk out of the back of the vehicle. They weren't what they used to be, thanks to the Commonwealth, but generations of enslavement, and his people were rightly worried about their guide. Who's this? The greyish-green shelled Xeno asked, pointing at the grubby finger at the human. Shizroy was a little curious as to why the Scrabian would hire a human considering their history. I'm the Foreman, he replied simply. What are you doing here? Shizroy could see that the creature's tiny wings flutter in anger and annoyance. I'm running things, the human replied simply once more. Running things? I didn't hire you. Who put you in charge? Did you know about this? The Scribian looked down at the Crescenoctua, who was simply confused. He was here on day one. He's been running things the whole time. I just assumed that he was in charge. I thought you knew. He shrugged at that, and the Scribian chittered away angrily. I hired you to run this project. Why would I hire a human? Why would he be in charge? At first, the avian looked from the Scribian over to the human, and then back, clearly confused. Because he's human? And then she kept going, But I'm just an architect. I don't know how to run a job site, she protested. Feathers ruffled a bit as she looked worried. Who hired you? The oblivious, upset Scribian asked the human now. Me. I hired me. I showed up and made sure that they started paying me a fair wage. Don't worry, it's less than half of what she makes, even if I'm worth twice as much. The human didn't seem worried in the slightest, despite his apparent fraud in his job position. The Scribian looked so shocked he gasped at the air while the Crescenoctua just tilted her head. Half as much? Then how did you afford that wonderful nesting day present? I have friends in low places, the human said with a shrug. This is outrageous. The Scribian finally got himself under control enough to talk then. You're fired. To everyone's surprise, the human just laughed. Look, pal, I'm too busy to be fired. You didn't have a foreman because, let me guess, all your buddies told you just to focus on the architect and set a budget and the rest would sort itself out, right? That's because humans like me show up when new projects get started and we take over. That's what we do. Have you got any idea how hard it is to keep a dozen different cultures all working together and not fighting each other? Because humans have had lots of experience with that. From Italians, the Irish, the Chinese, and so forth and so on. And before the wild dogs and stuff, we've got pack mentally ingrained in our DNA. So one of us shows up, takes charge, and gets paid way less than we should to show you how good we are. Then, for the next project, you call me up, and we argue about the price until we both feel that we've screwed each other over, and that's how it works. Shisroy couldn't believe the confidence that this figure standing next to him. He'd never dream of doing anything like this in a million years, least of all to a Scribian. This is preposterous. What's your name, human? George. I'll make sure you never work in the city again. When the Scribian growled that out, however, the Xian chauffeur stepped up and whispered something into his hearing device. After a moment, the Scribian looked over at his chauffeur. What? All of them? To which the Crasium nodded. And you say the project is ahead of schedule? He looked back at the Crescenoctua then. Yes, sir, and despite the extra overtime and the other expenses, a little under budget. He has this very amazing technique where he screams at the vendors and gives us lower prices. I keep thinking that they'll never sell to us again, but I'm told the vendors fight over who gets to sell to us. I really don't understand the intricacies yet. She looked back up at the Scribian, who seemed to be nervously rubbed the fat sack with his back hands. Very well, you keep your job, George, the foreman, but you better deliver on this project, human. The Scribian looked around the site for a moment and then climbed back inside of his Land Roller. See you tomorrow, Susie. The human nodded to the Crescenoctua and he waved and then moved on before the vehicle had left. Come on, Roy. Because Roy turned and followed along behind George as they headed to the trailer at the edge of the lot. Right, so I've got a job you can do, so I need somebody to work on the floors and frescoes and stuff. You aren't worried about the Scribian? He asked, still rather surprised at the turn of events. What? That fat-ass beetle? Frick no. Like I said, I'm too busy to let him fire me. Anyway, in here. He opened up the door and the Shisroy found himself in a chilled room with all sorts of pink boxes on little shelves around the central table. So, with a project this size, there's about 10 birthdays per day. That's hatch day for you. I've just been giving them the treats plain, but with you here, we can get fancy. Shisroy frowned as he watched the human set his clipboard down and then pull a pink box from the shelf. He set it on the table and opened it to reveal a large baked confection of some kind. Shisroy could smell fruit and flour and some sort of citrus. I'm not a baker. What's with all the Xenos who come in thinking that you only know how to do one thing? Haven't any of you thought about using what you know and applying it to something else? Listen, you're a stonemason, right? Decorative work. You carve out all those intricate little patterns on the faces and images and stuff on stone all the time. So instead of carving them, you're just applying them to the top. The human walked way to the refrigerator at the back of the room and pulled out a squeeze tube filled with some sort of red substance. This is universal frosting. Every species who works on my projects can eat these. Shizroy hesitantly took the offered tube, handing it to the larger hands, then handing it down to his more dexterous smaller hands as he felt it over. What am I supposed to do with it? The human flipped through several pages on his clipboard and then pulled out one setting on it on the table. Here, this is a list of everyone with a hatch day today. He ran a finger down the list and 9 names to show Shizroy. Then, this is how you say happy birthday, or hatch day, or whatever in the native language. Just copy it down the cakes, or pastries, or whatever. This little dot here, he showed Shizroy the red circle on the front of the pink box, corresponds with the dots on the paper for who gets what. Sure enough, Shizroy saw that each name had a different colored dot next to it. There were some repeats, of course, but clearly the human had gotten the species-appropriate trees for all of them. Why are you doing this? He asked then. Giving you a job. Come on, Roy, you're not supposed to ask me that. You're supposed to say thanks and get to work. The human laughed. No, the treats, Shizroy clarified. Oh, well, it's a human trick. You want people to enjoy coming to work and make them feel welcome, just like a part of a pack. A good job isn't just about getting paid. It's also about making a pack with your co-workers and looking out for each other. Speaking of, what's your hatch day? He human picked up his clipboard again, clicking his writing implement as he got ready to use it. The 3rd morning of the 5th annual section. Right, and you were Reformed or Orthodox? Shizroy was a little surprised that the human knew to ask that. Reformed? With that, the human nodded and slapped Shizroy on the back, making him stagger forward a little. Welcome to the pack, Roy. Don't frick up. With that, the human collected his things and walked out of the chilled trailer. He'd never been part of a pack before. After realizing that he'd been left alone, he blinked and then looked down at the paper and then squeeze tube in his hand. He had no idea how to decorate with frosting, but this was his job, so he was supposed that he'd learn quick. After all, George the Foreman was counting on him. Though now that he had a better understanding of how humans got things done, they just did them. He shrugged at that and just looked down at the paper and started his first task at his first job. Something told him that working for a human would teach him a lot. Perhaps not about stonemasonry, but about everything else. End of story. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel or the author, all the stuff is down below. And as always, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next story. Cheers.